Eyes on me. Class, I need you guys to silence. Be silent, please. Quiet down. Okay, eyes over here. Oh my gosh.
As teachers, words are our tools. So when words alone aren't enough to keep our classes under control, where do we go from there? Welcome to EPI's Launch Your Classroom. I'm Kyle Pope. Sometimes as a teacher, we're tempted to raise our voice as student noise levels increase. The volume of the room goes up and up. You're not accomplishing anything, and you start to get emotional, resembling that quote from Macbeth, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. What if I told you there was another way? A way that you could control your classroom without saying a single word? Well, there is. And it's by using this. Creating hand signals for noise levels or transitions or even handling technology can help you control your room without adding to the chaos. It takes your emotions out of the equation, it helps you create positive peer pressure for gaining compliance, and it's easily repeatable. When my classroom first got a set of computers, I was so excited. Finally, we'd be able to do some 21st century learning. So I started brainstorming some of the activities that we could do. We could visit ancient ruins remotely. I could have students cooperate by working on the same document. We could even go online and find historical sources. I was really excited about having a paperless classroom because I didn't have to wait in line at the copier anymore. But I wanted to plan out this first activity to be extremely engaging. I wanted to show off this new technology. So I wanted to problem shoot. I had to think of what could happen. So where to go during a tech issue, thought about how the computers should be assigned out, which way should they be stored, and finally the day came where we were able to have our first lesson on the computers. So it started off great. The students were really engaged, they were excited about the new technology, they were working hard on their assignments, and then I wanted to stop them for a minute and check for learning. That's when I noticed that there was a problem. I had some students who were way engaged and just continued to type away. I had others who completely shut their laptops down thinking the assignment was over. I had created a classroom management issue for myself. Now, this wasn't the students' fault, all right? I had not told them my expectations for this assignment. I needed something like a pause button. I needed something that would allow me to continue this dialogue uninterrupted, something that would allow me to continue talking without stopping to explain long directions. What I needed was a hand signal. Now, we're going to come back to my story in just a minute, but right now, I want to go to Ryan, who's going to introduce us to hand signals for elementary school students.
All right, so the name of the game for hand signals, when you're calling K-6 students to compliance, to attention, you've got to be engaging. Also, you want to think about what's going to give you time to get all of your class fully compliant. So in this strategy I'm going to model, I call it ready for action. I try to make it fun. I try to make sure that I have my anchor chart here so students can see what I expect and how the strategy is going to go every time. So watch as I model this and pay careful attention to how I wait for compliance. So my students are working. I need them to focus up front. I'm going to do this. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then I'm going to make my arms into this shape. And I'm going to wait, and I'm going to look for every student, even the ones in the back, to go just like this. And when I see them, I'll say, quiet on this set, and action. Now, if my students all had their arms like this, they get to do the fun part that they want to do, which is action. And then I can start teaching and carry on with my day with my students, fully paying attention. All right, so a huge challenge when you're teaching younger kids is the time that you have, both to answer questions, to make sure that they're ready. So I'm going to show you a really, really easy way to use hand signals to give you more time and to decrease distractions. So, one, if a child holds up one finger in your classroom, that means they need materials, pencil, paper, whatever it is. Two means they have a question. After you've acknowledged the two, they don't have to sit there with their hand up and they don't have to say, Mr. Hennessy, Mr. Hennessy. Just the two, and then they can put it down when you acknowledge them. So watch how this works. I'm teaching some very difficult stuff. I don't have a lot of time, and I see a student in the back who holds up a 1. I know they need a pencil. I don't have to stop. I just say, and I keep going. Okay, so if the students are working in small groups or individually, and I'm working with a student one-on-one, and they need some time, and in the back I see a student going, I know they need me. I simply see that student, I say, and then I go back to working. They know I'm coming. They don't have to sit there and call my name. Really easy. 1 for materials, 2 for help. All right, so assessment can be tricky. It can be hard to figure out how to work into your instruction, but formative assessment, the kind of assessment that can inform both what you're teaching right then or inform the kind of students you need to work with in small groups, whatever it may be, you don't need to overthink this one, in my opinion, especially with the younger students. It's as simple as the thumbs up, thumbs down, or the ever popular wiggle thumb. So periodically through your lesson, you want to stop. You want to say, all right, who's with me? Show me the thumbs up if you feel like you could absolutely teach this to your neighbor, and you're going to look out. And you've already taught your students, thumbs up means yes, I could do it. Thumbs down means no way, Mr. Hennessy, I need some help. And the wiggle thumb means maybe I need a little more help. Now, if you teach them that and you use it regularly, you're going to be able at any point during your lesson to stop, look, and then change the instruction to meet the needs of most students.
All right, we're back in the studio and we're going to continue unpacking these hand signals. So Ryan, thank you for joining us again.
I'm back.
And
Have me back.
Really enjoyed that demonstration. That was amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a lot from my own experience. Those worked for me. So thanks for letting me show them.
Yeah, great. So when we're thinking about hand signals, what kind of ballpark number are we thinking about?
That's one of those things, Kyle. I feel like every teacher is gonna find their number.
Mm-hmm.
So that is to say, there's not a magic set number, in my opinion. But this is a good rule of thumb. For every major transitional activity or need in your classroom that you would address with a routine or procedure,
Mm-hmm.
right? Usually there's a hand signal that will match that,
Yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about designing the hand signal, like where do you get that inspiration from? Where do you decide, this is the movement I should use for this one?
For me, it really comes down to kind of 2 deciding factors.
Mm-hmm.
I was always one, again, elementary, right? So I found it useful to have theme in my classroom sometimes, or like, for example, one year my theme was grow, and various boards, I tied it together, right? So in that case, I may pick hand signals that may go along with that, right? I think in the demonstration, I talked about using the action move. So that would go on with a theme where we want to talk about being ready for action. Really good for like test prep and stuff where students may have some nerves about a big final performance type thing. So the other factor I would say is just what's easy.
Yeah.
You have to do this thing hundreds of times, if not thousands, through a year, at least for me. So I don't want to be doing something insanely, big.
Too many steps.
Yeah, sometimes it's really simple. Simple wins.
Yeah.
So those are my 2 kind of deciding factors.
Good. So helping students memorize these. Obviously, they're not going to get them all the first time around. So what was your process for that?
So that's a great question. First of all, you said they're not going to get it the first time around. So I'm going to push back and say they're not going to get the first, second, third, fourth, fifth time around. So really, it's useful if you just get rid of for me, I find it really important to get rid of, they should know this by now. Just take that whole idea and trash it, okay? And replace it with this idea. I'm going to teach it and model it and teach it and model it as much as I need to until the students in my classroom are meeting my expectations. They understand what those are, right?
Yeah.
And that they're doing it in the same way that you tie your shoes in the morning. It's not that you memorized how to do it.
Right.
It's just what you do
Yeah.
to put your shoes on.
Yeah.
You can get there, but not if you think it's going to take 5 times, 7 times. You just do it.
Yeah. Well, I really liked your anchor chart and the artwork on it and everything. It was just so good. I mean, that's a constant visual that they can always go back and look, even when you're not working actively on the hand signal at that time. So if you're having a lot of hand signals because you want them to align with your procedures, how do you decide which one needs an anchor chart and which one maybe you can just do on hand signal alone?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kyle. For me, it is anytime that I can foresee needing to reteach a hand signal because it is crucial to the teaching learning cycle. The one I demonstrated is crucial. Therefore, it has an anchor chart. It's crucial because it calls attention. I don't think any hand signal is more important than that one.
Yeah.
Will you ever need to stop needing students to look at you and kind of quiet down and get ready for you about to say no, right? So that needs an anchor chart, because what you're probably going to find yourself doing is saying, all right, y'all, it's time to review this because we're getting a little shaky with it. Remember, here's what we said, and we wrote this part, and it says what to do. You want to have that there for those critical ones. I think you can overdo it with that, though. So maybe with that one, just maybe the top 3 or 4 that you know must be in place at all times.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at it, from the high school perspective, at times hand signals are critical then as well. But that's one thing I was so interested in about your anchor chart. I used anchor charts, but never for hand signals. I think when you're dealing with high school kids who maybe have a little bit more maturity or maybe can pick up on things a little faster. You talked about teach, teach, and teach. Usually I found out that with the high school students at least, I only had to do it 2 or 3 times, and then they picked up on it pretty quickly. So it's interesting to me to see the differences between the older students versus the younger students.
That's super amazing to me, Kyle. First of all, I'm really jealous. No, I didn't mind reteaching it, but can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Would there ever have been a time you wouldn't have been willing to reteach it if you needed?
No.
Of course,
I mean,
right? So that's the same.
Yeah.
So what you're dealing with, it sounds like to me, is you've got students who are just a little more used to what school
maybe I should thank you for that, because by the time they got to me, they already understood that was an expectation to pick up on these hand signals.
It was the anchor chart. No. But yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. It's a really interesting point. I imagine maybe for you too, and I don't know if you watched my strategy, I have a very elaborate and kind of fun way to get the students to call attention. I know they want to be loud with that, and so I'm capitalizing. I would imagine you didn't have to be so involved, right? You didn't have to make it so.
Yeah, generally not as much, but it's very interesting to me that you use that hand signal, because I use the exact same one, but for something a little bit different. And so I think we're going to look at that a little bit right now. So thank you again, Ryan, for being here.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
So as you just heard from Ryan and I's conversation, there are different ways to use hand signals, and you will use them differently depending on whether you're in secondary or primary education. Sometimes you may even use the same exact hand signal, but for a different purpose. So earlier in the stream, I was talking with you about how I had difficulties with technology, and sometimes my students would get way too focused on it or their assignment, and they wouldn't be able to listen or concentrate as I wanted to talk to them and check for learning within that assignment. And so I came up with a hand signal to tell them exactly what I wanted them to do with the computer when it was time to speak about it. So I would say something like, all right, class, let's talk about your assignment for a couple minutes. And as they would look up, I would say, go ahead and put your computers at a 45-degree angle, meaning that I would want them to put their computers like this. The issue with the laptops a lot of times is when you close it, you risk losing some of the material that you're working on. In addition, you could possibly have to re-enter your password, stuff that's very time consuming, and you just don't want to take that type of breaks over and over again with your laptops. So by putting it at a 45-degree angle, the student couldn't focus on the screen anymore, right? They had to focus on the conversation that was going on in the classroom, and we didn't lose time later on by them having to re-enter their password. So occasionally I would still have a student who wouldn't be listening, and they would continue to work on that assignment. And so I would just call on them and I would say, hey, Carlos, what'd you get for number 3? And as he would look up to me, I would give him the signal and not have to say it out loud. And he would know that I wanted him to put his computer at a 45-degree angle. I didn't have to interrupt the conversation to do it. And I didn't have to, inflict any frustration or anything like that. It was all in the hand signal about what he was supposed to do. I also would use it to say close your Chromebook or open your Chromebook when we were ready to continue along with the assignment. All right, so now we're going to go to Helena, who's going to talk about hand signals and how they vary across cultures, and she's also going to tell you how to navigate those as a teacher.
When implementing hand signals, you have to take into account that body language varies across cultures and that hand gestures that have a positive or neutral meaning for you might have a different meaning for someone else. So my first tip is, when deciding on hand signals that you want to use in your classroom, be culturally sensitive. Be aware that some of your hand gestures may have a different meaning here in the US. Also, be aware that your American students may have very diverse backgrounds. For this reason, I would always recommend you to make some research first and to check what some hand signals might represent in your student's home country. I also want to show you why it's so important to make this research and to learn about these differences. So for instance, in some European countries, touching below the eye with your index finger stands for I don't believe you or you are lying. Wiggle your index finger. Palm up is a neutral gesture for come here in some countries, but might be a rude gesture in some other countries. In some countries, the thumb in a fist is a playful gesture to interact with children, pretending that you have stolen their nose. However, in some countries in Eastern Europe or Turkey, this gesture is offending. Please be aware that there is no universal or global sign language either. I know that some teachers incorporate sign language in their hand signals, like the "help me please" sign, and I believe that's a great idea since your students learn both nonverbal cues that facilitate learning and a different form of language. However, deaf people throughout the world use different sign languages depending on their country of origin. In North America, for example, ASL, American Sign Language, is the main form of communication. This means that some hand gestures used in the American Sign Language won't be understood or might seem offending in other cultures. So even though it's a good idea to have a look at the American Sign Language to come up with hand signals for your class, you need to be aware that the hand gestures in the American Sign Language are not used globally and might have a different meaning for students with other backgrounds.
All right, so we're in the studio and we have Helena with us today, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the cultural implications of hand signals. So Helena, welcome to Launch Your Classroom.
Thank you.
So when I taught, I had a lot of students from Central America and from South America. What advice would you have given me about hand signals?
So I would just recommend you, to do some research first before implementing hand gestures or hand signals in your class. And you can just do that by going online and research that. You will find a lot of valuable resources online on that.
Yeah, well, great. So if I had a student from a country that I wasn't able to find any information about, there wasn't anything online, particularly about hand gestures, where should I go from there?
So in this case, I would just have an open dialogue with your students or with the specific student, and just maybe talk after class with them, and just go over the hand signals that you want to implement. And also, if you have like colleagues from this part of the world, like from South America, for instance, I would just talk with them and show them what you plan to implement in your class, and then they can give you some feedback on that as well.
Yeah, what a great way to continue building that cultural awareness and learn a little bit more about the country where your students may be from.
Exactly, and build this positive rapport.
Yeah, that's so important. So let's say I went ahead and I made a hand signal and it was inappropriate to a certain student. Maybe I got a shocked reaction or maybe they giggled a little bit at it, but I realized that to them it means something different. What would be my next step?
Again, I would just say, it can happen. So just after class, take a minute to talk to these students or this student, and just also, let them know that it was not on purpose, that you just didn't know what it meant for them, and apologize. And also, if it was very inappropriate, I would also recommend you to apologize to the parents.
Yeah, that relationship is so important too.
It is.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The power of hand signals is that it lets you give your students direction without adding to the noise of the classroom. As the room stays calm, you stay calm, and it'll help you to avoid any negative emotional response. Hand signals demand attention. You can look away from me and still hear what I'm saying, but you have to look at me to see the hand signal. Linguists, anthropologists, and psychologists all speak to the power of hand signals on action and memory. Research has indicated that students follow directives better with an accompanying hand signal. So take some time. Think about what hand signals you already use and which hand signals you should be using to help you achieve your goal. Thank you, and I hope you'll join us for the Q&A.
All right. Thanks to our great audience for watching and for the really insightful questions we've been getting in the chat and our social media channels and through email. We're going to answer as many of these as we can today. Remember, if you have any questions about using hand signals for classroom management, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll answer them live. Joining us today for the Q&A is, of course, the host of Launch Your Classroom Live, Kyle Pope. Kyle, thanks for a really informative episode.
Oh, thank you. The great guest that we had on today really taught me a lot.
And also joining us is co-host of Launch Your Classroom Live and EPI's Director of Program Services, Ryan Hennessy. Ryan, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I thought it was a very, very fun episode.
All right, let's take a look at our first question. Tebet wants to know, what will it look like if all the teachers of the same grade class use different hand signals? Ryan, any thoughts on this one?
Sure. Thanks, Tebet, for the question. I think in a typical classroom where you have students who stay in that classroom with the teacher all day, at least from my experience in elementary, it doesn't matter so much that all the teachers have the same hand signals. You can have a little variation there, and that'll be all right. Now, if you had a situation with itinerant teachers, meaning teachers that travel around and visit many different classrooms, I still think that you could have different ones. The thing I would maybe suggest is if teachers are going to see a level of students, same grade class, then you probably want to bring with you a small poster that acts as like that anchor chart that I was talking about. Another thing you could do is partner with the other teachers and just say, hey, what would be simplest for us all to do and make it simple for the students? So thanks for the question.
All right, up next we have Kenroy, who wants to know, I think hand signals could really help me, but I'm not sure how to create them. Is there a certain movement that's effective? Ryan, any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Kenroy. So if you think they can help you, I highly, I strongly suggest that you go ahead and implement them. When it comes to creating them, is there a certain movement that's effective? Not really, not a certain movement so much as just some basic considerations for any movement that you choose. So here's some things to think about. Number one, how big and pronounced does the movement need to be? For younger students, as I showed in my demonstrations, the movement may need to be a little bigger, especially to call them to attention. Now, is that more effective than a smaller movement for older students? No, it's not more effective, it's just more developmentally appropriate. So I would encourage you to think first about your students and make sure that your whatever movement you come up with is visible, that the students see it, and hopefully they can enjoy it a little bit too. Thank you.
And our next question comes from Isabella. I've used waiting for compliance in the past, and it was really effective. But this year, I have a couple students who will not stop talking regardless of how long I wait. What should I do? Kyle, do you have any experience with this?
Yeah, thank you so much, Isabella. First thing, make sure that you're giving them enough time when you're waiting for compliance. It's a mistake that some teachers made, and I've been guilty of making myself, is you're not waiting quite long enough. It needs to feel awkward sometimes. But if you get to where the rest of the class is complying, and then it's been 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and there's just one or two who are consistently not in compliance from your waiting, then it's time to go to your regular deterrents, your proximity control. Call them by name if you need to, and then follow up with them later and say, hey, I notice the rest of the class is doing this, and I just want to make sure that you understand what we do during this time period. So just follow along like you would any other type of minor misbehavior, and make sure that they understand what your expectations are during that time. So thank you very much for your question.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Ryan, Yannicka wants to know, what is the best way to teach students how to utilize hand signals rather than shouting out?
Great question. If you have, if you have this class from the very beginning of school, I would suggest, and I do think most teachers would agree, the best way to teach those students how to use the hand signals is every single day for a percentage of your lesson. Usually the recommendation is about 20% of time spent teaching routines and building rapport and those things against 80% of your instruction. So I would make sure that in that 20% every day I'm teaching at least one hand signal, how to utilize it, especially when it comes to shouting out, because that's one of the behaviors you need to get under control quickly. Now, even when the students say, yes, we know, you keep doing it. And then the next recommendation I have is that you never change that hand signal. When you see students starting to move away from it, or maybe they're just shouting out and forgetting to do it, you calmly reteach it, model it anytime you need to. The key here is reteach. That's the best way to teach.
Okay. Next, Luis asks, how do you select a theme for your students? Anything I should consider? Kyle, is there anything he should consider?
Yeah, thank you, Luis. So when you're thinking about a theme, you might want to make it something that is more general, that will have appeal to a lot of your students. If you select something like maybe a particular sport, that may have an appeal to a couple of students, but maybe not the general class. So, think about something like perhaps nature or something like that you can implement a lot of different stuff within that theme. It's also not necessarily a bad idea to go to your students and kind of poll them and see what their interests are. And then if you see that you have, a lot of your class who is interested in a certain thing, be it, a book or TV show or activity or whatever, then you can take that as the theme to your class, and that will help you with the engagement level from your students. So that's a wonderful question. Thank you.
All right. Up next, Gloria. Do all the hand signal anchor charts need to be at the front of the room? I'm running out of space, Ryan.
Yeah, Gloria, I can certainly relate. I know we walk a fine line with all those things in the front of the room, but I'll tell you, no, they don't need to be in the front of the room. And more importantly, I might not even suggest that they all be in the front of the room, even if you had the space, okay? Here's why. The front of the classroom should be kept as clear as possible for the students to see, interact with, and understand lesson elements. What I might do is make a space maybe off to the side, even as students enter or wherever you'd like to put them, and put your anchor charts there. Here's the key, Gloria. When you teach them, like I was talking about in the last question, when you reteach them, move to where those anchor charts are and get the students to watch you go there, and then you teach, reteach, and you make sure that you reference those anchor charts. That's what they're for. They anchor the student's knowledge. Another thing I would say is that if you have classroom spaces set up for particular use, so maybe you have a morning meeting area, maybe you have a classroom library or a group station area, you can also put your hand signal anchor charts in those appropriate centers. So if they, maybe you have some for how to get the group started working, put that over in that group work center. Thank you, great question.
Up next, we have Pinky, who wants to know, are clapping and snapping the fingers, can these be considered as hand signals?
Well, thank you, Pinky. Yeah, they can, depending on how you use them. So if you're using like a clap to call attention to maybe where you clap loudly once and then have your students, clap twice to say that they're listening to you, something of that nature would definitely be considered kind of your hand signals. And snapping along the same lines, it just kind of depends on how you're using it. If you're implementing as part of your procedures, if it's something that they interact with, if it's used for these ideas like of gaining attention and those types of things, then yeah, you can consider these types of things hand signals. Thank you so much for your question.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Kyle. Let's go ahead and go to the next question. This is coming in from Nokofila, who wants to know, my question will focus on cross-cultural communication. Diversity in the classroom calls for inclusion of everyone in the classroom. How do you go about including all diverse learners? Ryan, I know you're passionate about this.
Absolutely, I am. So Nokafela, thanks for the question. As far as focusing on cross-cultural communication and making sure that we are creating a positive, welcoming environment for every student, regardless of description, it's so important for our learners, and to make sure that the students that we're sending out as future citizens grow up with that same kind of viewpoint. So let me answer your question about one way maybe you could get that into your hand signals. How do I go about including diverse learners using hand signals? I would include them in the creation. I would sit down, I would run a discussion about ways that in my country, maybe these are traditional ways that we signal quiet. For example, in the United States, often we put one finger over our mouth and we go shh, right? So that's kind of a little bit of a hand signal. Foster that discussion with students from diverse backgrounds. What do you use? What do you use? And not only are the students sharing, but in that conversation, you may be able to take some of those gestures and create a diverse list of hand signals for your classroom.
Thanks for that, Ryan. Up next, we have Tarek, who wants to know, I think hand signals are effective, but what about using the whole body language as eye signals, voice changes, movements in the classroom? Kyle, what do you think?
I think those things are important that you're talking about. Using your eyes as a signal, though, you may run into a little bit of issue with that, especially if you're using them for some sort of directive or something that you're trying to get across to your students. Simply because if you have students who are sitting in the back or maybe off to the side, it may be difficult for them to read your eyes. But if you're talking about just generalized, like making eye contact with someone to let them know you're listening to them or something like that, then yeah, totally use that type of things. Voice change, We talked earlier about adding to the noise level of the classroom. So if you're talking about volume, it's not always the best solution that you can have to raise your voice, just because it adds to that chaos of the room like we were speaking to earlier. For movement in the classroom, I like movement in the classroom. I think if you can use your body language and the way that you personally move to get the class to move, to get the class to do something along with you or in reaction to you, then I say go for it. So thank you so much for your question.
All right. Ryan, up next, Stone wants to know, can I involve my kids in agreeing on particular hand signals for particular actions?
Stone, I feel like you and I are of the same mind. Short answer, absolutely you can. Yes, I would say the most important thing here is that you need student buy-in. Okay, so with some students in some classes, some groups of students, they come in and they're willing to do whatever it is that you have pre-planned, right? I can show them my own hand signals and they're just going to do it. But earlier we had a question about a couple of students who just wouldn't stop talking no matter what hand signals. Stone, what you're proposing here may be an answer for students like that. Give them involvement, it gives them ownership, and when they have ownership, they care about it, and they may be more likely to comply. Great question, Stone.
Up next, we've got Alan, who wants to know, as an international teacher, how will I know what hand signals might be offensive to American students? Kyle?
Alan, I'm glad that this is something that you're concerned about, and I wish we had Helena in here with us right now to help you out with this. But I think if she was here, what she would say is do your research. Try to get online, find out what you can. If you're an international teacher and you're working in the United States, you probably have some American colleagues around you. So there's nothing wrong. They will understand this issue. So there's nothing wrong with going up to them, speaking with them, talking about any signals or gestures that you think may be offensive, and see what they say. And opening that dialogue with them will help you kind of understand the cultural and help you build the cultural awareness in yourself and help you to feel more confident when you start using these types of hand signals in your classroom. Thank you.
All right, Ryan, we've got one for you here from Jeff. I tend to gesture with my hands a lot. Would it be confusing if I added hand signals to all this movement?
Not at all, Jeff. I also tend to do that. What's important here is the intention. You definitely want to have hand signals that are intentional. You want it to be obvious to your students when you do it, and therefore I would, if I were you, I would try to come up with some hand signals that I would never make a general just kind of gesture that looked like that. So for example, in my 3, 2, 1 action, that's not a gesture I would make. So make one that looks intentional, that you only would use on purpose, and I don't think you'll have a problem.
Okay, this will have to be our last question for the day. Annalyn wants to know, I think my hand signals are too complex. My kids aren't getting it. Where do I go from here? Kyle?
Thanks, Annalyn. So you've already figured out the issue that the hand signals are too complex, so bravo for you problem shooting on that. What you should do at this point is just have a little bit of discussion and reset with your kids. Be like, hey, guys, I tried to introduce some hand signals and I realized that I may have made them just a little bit too complex, so what I'm doing now is we're going to rethink some hand signals. And Ryan was talking about this a little earlier, and I think it's great. Including the kids on the development process of these hand signals. And I think that if you do get your kids to help you out, and you may have to direct them a little bit to continue to try to keep it simple, they may go off with some complex stuff too. So keep that in mind, keep it simple, help them, help you to develop those hand signals. And I think you'll finally start seeing these work better. So thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. All right, everyone, that's all the questions we have time for today. Please join us back here next week, November 2nd at 4 p.m. Eastern for the next episode of Launch Your Classroom Live. The way you begin your lesson sets the course for student learning. So next week, we'll be looking at innovative and engaging ways to start your lesson. Join us next Friday for How to Hook Your Students. To get the most out of next week's episode, you're going to want to take a look at your Launch Your Classroom handbook. If you don't already have a copy of Launch Your Classroom, then click the link in the description below to head on over to Amazon.com. Launch Your Classroom, Building a Foundation for Learning is available now and is packed with tips, infographics, and instructional videos about building rapport with students, desk layouts, and so much more. And remember, to stay up to date on all the free professional development that EPI offers, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel? And while you're at it, click the bell icon to receive notifications when we're live. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you next time.